Picture a blazing Arizona sunset in 1876, where Margaret Hale, a widowed rancher, stood over blood-soaked sand, staring at two giant Apache warriors, men who could snap her in half, bleeding out behind her failing farm. They were hunted killers, their lives worth nothing to the frontier's merciless code. She was a woman clinging to the ghost of her husband's dreams. One choice, save them or walk away, would spark a fire no law could extinguish. Could a single act of defiance rewrite a widow's fate and forge peace in a land of war? This story's ending has left millions breathless. Hit subscribe, share your city or country below, and stay until dawn breaks. You'll never guess how one woman's courage reshaped the desert's heart. The sun bled red over the Arizona territory in 1876, painting the cracked earth around Margaret Hale's failing ranch in hues of fire and rust. At 32, she was a widow, her hands calloused from wrestling a life out of this unforgiving desert, since her husband, John, broke his neck in a horse fall 2 years back. The townsfolk in nearby Red Creek sneered at her stubborn grip on the land, a woman alone with no man to lean on. Each night, fear gnawed at her as coyotes howled and shadows danced beyond her lantern's glow. But Margaret had learned to bury fear beneath work that kept her tethered to John's dream, even as the cattle died and the wells ran dry. This late summer afternoon, she was hauling a dead cow from the fence line, its bloated carcass reeking under the heat. Her arms burned, sweat stinging her eyes, when something caught her gaze, a trail of blood, thick and dark, snaking across the sand. It wasn't the cow's. The streaks were fresh, smeared wide, leading toward a dry gully where jagged rocks clawed at the sky. Her pulse quickened. Blood meant trouble. Human trouble. Out here, that could be rustlers, deserters, or worse. She gripped her husband's old knife, its blade worn but sharp, and followed the trail, boots crunching on gravel. In the gully's shadow, she froze. 2 Apache warriors lay sprawled among the stones, their massive frames dwarfing the boulders around them. The first, face down, was a mountain of muscle, blood pooling beneath him, soaking his torn shirt. The second knelt beside him, one hand clutching a broken dagger, the other pressed against his own ribs, where his breathing rasped like a bellows. His eyes, cold as flint, locked onto hers, not pleading, but daring her to move. These weren't ordinary men. Their necklaces, woven with intricate beads and bone, screamed high rank, and the warrior tattoos curling across their arms marked them as men trained to kill. Margaret's stomach twisted. Apache on her land meant one thing: death, either theirs or hers. The kneeling warrior shifted, his frame towering even on one knee, easily 6.5 feet of lean, coiled power. "Go," he growled, voice low, English jagged but clear. "No trouble for you." His gaze flicked to the unconscious man, whose chest barely rose. Margaret's mind raced. She knew the frontier's unwritten law: let them die, and no one would blink. Townsfolk might even slap her back for it. But save them, and she'd be branded a traitor, her neck in a noose if the wrong eyes saw. Red Creek's sheriff had hanged a man last spring for less, just trading whiskey with a Navajo. She turned to walk away, boots heavy, each step a hammer on her resolve. A widow didn't survive by taking risks. She'd learned that when John's accident left her begging neighbors for help in a storm, only to find every door bolted. But 3 paces out, a sound stopped her cold. The wounded man's breath, a wet, rattling wheeze, like John's in his final hours as she held his hand, powerless. That night, she'd ridden through rain, screaming for aid, and no one answered. The memory clawed at her, sharp as the knife in her grip. She spun back, cursing under her breath. Not compassion, but defiance drove her. defiance against becoming the kind of soul who'd shut out a dying man. The kneeling warrior watched, eyes narrowing as she approached. "Stay back," he warned, dagger twitching. Margaret ignored him, kneeling by the unconscious man. His pulse was faint, blood seeping from a gash across his ribs, deep enough to show bone. He was heavier than any steer she'd ever wrestled, his frame nearly 7 feet, solid as iron. The other warrior, his brother, she guessed from their shared sharp cheekbones, tensed, but didn't strike. "Help me move him," she said, voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. The warrior hesitated, then nodded, pain flashing across his face as he stood, ribs creaking. Together, they dragged the wounded man toward her woodshed, 100 yards off. Each step was a battle, his weight crushing her shoulders, blood slicking her hands. The shed's door groaned as they shoved him inside, laying him on a pile of old sacks. The second warrior followed, collapsing against the wall, dagger still clutched. Margaret locked the door, the click echoing like a gavel. Outside, the sun sank, shadows swallowing the gully. She stood, heart pounding, staring at the locked shed. 2 Apache warriors, men who could kill her with a flick of their wrists, now hid on her land. One wrong move, and Red Creek's ropes would swing. But as the first stars pierced the sky, Margaret knew. She hadn't just saved them. She'd thrown herself into a fight, bigger than any desert storm, and the blood on her hands was only the beginning. As the stars burned cold above Margaret Hale's ranch, the locked woodshed stood like a coffin in the dark, holding 2 Apache warriors whose lives now chained her fate to theirs. The Arizona night swallowed her footsteps as she crossed the yard, the weight of her choice heavier than the blood-slicked man she'd dragged inside. The woodshed's air was thick with the tang of blood and dust when Margaret slipped back in, her lantern casting jagged shadows across the splintered walls. Tarek, the wounded warrior, lay sprawled on the sacks, his massive chest rising unevenly, each breath a labored rasp. His brother, Eamon, slumped against a crate, one hand pressed to his cracked ribs, the other still gripping the broken dagger. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, tracked her every move, distrust etched into his sweat-streaked face. The lantern's flicker caught the beadwork on their necklaces, glinting like stars against their scarred skin, a reminder of their rank and the trouble they'd bring. Margaret set the lantern down and knelt by Tarek, her hand steady despite the pulse hammering in her throat. His wound, a ragged tear across his ribs, oozed dark blood, the edges already swelling with infection. She'd seen enough dying cattle to know he had hours, maybe less, without help. "You got a name?" she asked, glancing at Eamon, her voice low but firm, cutting through the shed's stifling silence. "Eamon," he said. The word clipped, his gaze never softening. "He's Tarek. You shouldn't be here." His English was rough, carved by a tongue more used to Apache, but the warning was clear. Margaret ignored it, tearing a strip from her skirt to press against Tarek's wound. "I'm here now," she said, "and he's dying, unless you start talking. What happened?" Eamon's jaw tightened, his fingers flexing on the dagger. For a moment, she thought he'd lunge, but pain anchored him. "Mercenaries," he finally said. "White men, hunting our women for bounty. We stopped them, paid in blood." His voice dropped, heavy with something darker. "Tarek killed one who mattered. Now we're hunted." Margaret's hands paused, the cloth soaking red. "Mattered to who?" She pressed, her mind racing. Out here, a killing could spark a war. White or Apache, it didn't matter. Eamon's eyes flicked to Tarek, then back to her. "Son of Votan, a chief. His death breaks a truce. They want Tarek's head. Mine too, for standing with him." The words landed like a stone in her gut. A chief's son. No wonder they'd run to her nowhere ranch, bleeding and desperate. If Votan's warriors found them here, her shed would be a slaughterhouse. Worse, if Red Creek's sheriff caught wind, she'd be swinging from a rope for hiding hostiles. She wiped her hands on her skirt, the blood smearing like guilt. "You need to leave," she said. "Take him and go." Amon laughed, a bitter sound cut short by a wince. "He dies if we move. You think I want this? Your roof? Your mercy?" He spat the last word, his voice raw. "I'd rather face the desert than owe a white woman." His defiance stung, but Margaret saw the truth in his trembling grip. He was trapped, same as her. She stood, grabbing a tin of salve from a shelf, its bitter scent sharp as she smeared it over Tarek's wound. "Then help me keep him alive till dawn," she said. "After that, you're on your own." Amon watched, silent as she worked, binding Tarek's ribs with more torn cloth. The shed creaked under a gust of wind, the storm outside stirring dust that stung her eyes. Each gust felt like a warning. Time was running out. As she tied the last knot, Tarek stirred, a low groan escaping his lips. His eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever, and he muttered something in Apache, urgent, to Amon. Amon's face hardened, his reply sharp and fast. Margaret caught only the tone, fear, not for themselves, but for others. "What did he say?" she demanded. Amon hesitated, then spoke. "Our people, women, children, moving north. Those mercenaries weren't alone. More will come." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with the weight of lives left behind. Margaret's breath caught. A migrant caravan, vulnerable, and these two had been its shield. Now they were here, bleeding in her shed, while their kin faced slaughter. The lantern sputtered, shadows dancing like ghosts. Margaret's mind spun. She was no saint, no hero, just a widow trying to outlast the desert. But the image of women and children, hunted like game, clawed at her. She thought of John, his stubborn hope for this land, and how she'd fought to keep it. Letting these men die would be easy, but it would make her no better than the town that turned its back on her. Amon shifted, wincing as he straightened. "You don't owe us," he said, softer now, almost a challenge. "Why risk it?" Margaret met his gaze, her voice like iron. "Because I know what it's like to beg for help and get nothing." She turned back to Tarek, checking his pulse, her hand steady but her heart racing. The night stretched ahead, a gauntlet of blood and choices, and the desert outside whispered of riders drawing near. The desert's whisper grew louder, a low hum of hoofbeats, cutting through the night as Margaret Hale stood over Tarek's slowing pulse, her hand slick with his blood. The shed's walls seemed to close in, trapping her with two Apache warriors and a choice that could bury her. Dawn was hours away, but trouble was already riding hard toward her ranch. As the first gray light bled across the Arizona sky in 1876, Margaret stepped out from the woodshed, her boots crunching on frost-kissed sand. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and the horizon clear. Too clear. On the ridge above her ranch, 5 Apache warriors sat their horses, motionless, their silhouettes black against the dawn. Their war paint gleamed like fresh blood, rifles slung across their backs. They hadn't come to talk. Her gaze darted to the blood trail snaking from the gully, a scarlet arrow pointing straight to her shed. She cursed under her breath, the weight of last night's decision, now a noose tightening around her neck. Before she could slip back inside, a new sound froze her. A horse's snort, closer, from the west. A lone rider emerged from the sagebrush, his hat low, a glint of metal on his vest. Caleb Dunn, a bounty hunter who'd once shared whiskey with her husband, John, in better days. His eyes, cold as a snake's, swept the yard, lingering on the bloodstains. "Morning, Margaret," he drawled, dismounting with a predator's ease. "Strange place for a widow to be at dawn. Got trouble?" Her stomach churned. Caleb wasn't here by chance. Red Creek's gossip traveled fast, and a lone woman on disputed land was easy prey. "Just a coyote," she lied, keeping her voice steady. "Got into my fence. Messy work." Caleb's lips curled. Not a smile, but a challenge. He stepped closer, boots scuffing the bloodied sand. "Coyote, huh? Funny. Tracks look human. Big ones." He nodded toward the gully, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Margaret's mind raced. Caleb didn't need proof to stir trouble, just suspicion. If he found Tarek and Amon, he'd drag them to town for a bounty, and her for harboring hostiles. Red Creek's sheriff would see her swing before supper. "You're wasting daylight, Caleb," she said, stepping to block the shed's path. "No bounties here." He laughed, low and mean. "You're tough, Margaret, but weak. Always were. John's gone, and this land's slipping. Help me out, and I'll make sure the town protects you." His eyes flicked to the ridge, spotting the Apache warriors. "Or don't, and those savages up there will gut you before I do." The air thickened, the Apache riders stirring, their horses pawing the earth. Margaret's heart pounded, caught between Caleb's gun and the warriors' rifles. She needed time, a way out. But the shed's door creaked behind her. Eamon emerged, his massive frame filling the doorway, ribs bound with her torn cloth, eyes burning with defiance. "Go back," she hissed, but he ignored her, stepping into the light, dagger gleaming. Caleb's hand went to his pistol, his face paling at Eamon's size, 6.5 feet of coiled muscle, a warrior who could break him in half. "Apache," Caleb spat, drawing his gun. "You're done, Margaret. Harboring killers." Before she could speak, Eamon's voice cut through, low and steady. "She saved us. You want blood? Take mine. Not hers." The words stunned her, his loyalty a blade she hadn't expected. But Caleb's finger twitched on the trigger, and the ridge warriors raised their rifles, a standoff ready to explode. In the shed, Tarek's fevered groan broke the silence, faint but urgent. Margaret seized the moment, turning to Caleb. "He's dying. Shoot him, and you'll answer to his kin up there." She nodded to the ridge, gambling on Caleb's greed over his nerve. His eyes darted between Eamon and the warriors, calculating. "You're in deep, widow," he snarled, "but I'll be back with the sheriff. You'd better pray they're gone." As Caleb mounted and rode off, dust trailing like a warning, Margaret turned to Eamon. "You should have stayed hidden," she said, voice sharp. He met her gaze, unflinching. "You stood for us. I stand for you." His words carried a weight she couldn't name, a bond forged in blood and risk. If this story's grit and heart are pulling you in, hit subscribe and share your town below. Let's see how far this tale travels. The Ridge warriors dismounted, moving down the hill, and Margaret braced for what came next. Tarek's secret, whispered in fever, was her only card left, and she'd play it before the sun climbed higher. The Apache warriors' boots stirred dust as they descended the ridge, their rifles glinting like fangs in the Arizona dawn of 1876. Margaret Hale stood her ground, Tarek's fevered secret, her long-ago mercy to a wounded Apache boy, burning in her mind, her only shield against the storm about to break. The sun climbed, its heat pressing down like a judgment as Margaret faced the approaching warriors. Eamon stood beside her, his towering frame a silent vow of protection, though his cracked ribs made each breath a grimace. Behind them, the woodshed's door hung ajar, Tarek's labored breathing a faint pulse in the stillness. The lead warrior, his face carved with scars and war paint, raised a hand, halting his men. his eyes, deep as a canyon's shadow, fixed on Margaret, reading her like a tracker reads spoor. She felt exposed, a lone woman on a ranch that was no longer just hers, but a battleground where blood and honor would decide her fate. "Who speaks for you?" the warrior demanded, his English clipped, weighted with authority. Margaret stepped forward, her boots scuffing the blood-stained sand. "I speak for myself," she said, voice steady despite the fear clawing her gut. "I saved your kin because they were dying. That's all." No pleas, no excuses. She'd learned long ago that begging broke faster than bone in this desert. The warrior's gaze shifted to Iman, then back to her. "You hide Tarak, killer of Votan's son. His blood debt is not yours to pay." The words were a blade, sharp and final. Margaret's pulse raced. She knew the name Votan, a chief whose truce with Tarak's people hung by a thread. Tarak's act, killing to protect civilians, had snapped it, and now she stood in the wreckage. "He's no killer," she said. "He fought for his people. Same as you." A murmur rippled through the warriors, their hands tightening on their rifles. Iman tensed, his dagger glinting, ready to die before letting them near the shed. But before blades could flash, hoofbeats thundered from the east. A new rider crested the hill, his horse lathered, his presence heavy with command. Chief Kiona, Tarak, and Iman's father dismounted, his lean frame taut with the strength of a man who'd buried sons and still stood. His eyes, weathered by loss, swept the scene, lingering on Margaret with a flicker of recognition. "You," Kiona said, voice low, like gravel underfoot. "The woman by Red Creek, years ago. You gave water to my nephew." Margaret's breath caught. The boy she'd saved, half dead by the stream, was no myth. She'd left him with a canteen and salve, never expecting to see him again. Kiona stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Why shelter my sons now?" She swallowed, the truth her only weapon. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone die and do nothing." Her words hung in the air, raw as the desert wind. Kiona studied her, then turned to his warriors, speaking in rapid Apache. The scarred leader argued, pointing at the shed, his voice rising with accusations of betrayal. Iman whispered, "They want Tarak's life. Votan demands it for peace." Kiona raised a hand, silencing the debate. He faced Margaret, his decision a storm-gathering force. "You carry a blood debt for my nephew's life," he said. "Apache law protects you, but Tarak's act threatens our people. Votan's warriors will burn our camps if he lives." His eyes hardened. "Your land, this ranch, it's disputed, claimed by white men and Apache both. You will surrender it." Margaret's heart sank. The words were a gut punch. John's ranch, her last tie to him, was her blood and bone. "You can't," she said, voice breaking. Kiona's face was stone. "You'll manage a trading post here, neutral ground. No guns, no blood. Apache and white men meet under your watch. Refuse, and Tarak dies, and you with him." The warriors shifted, hands on weapons, ready to enforce the verdict. Iman's jaw clenched, his loyalty torn between his father and the woman who'd saved them. Margaret looked at the shed, Tarak's life hanging by a thread, then at the land she'd fought to keep. Losing it meant losing John all over again, and Red Creek would brand her a traitor, shunning her to the desert's edge. She felt the ground crumble beneath her, her defiance no match for Kiona's law. "I'll do it," she said, the words ash in her mouth. "But you keep your son alive." Kiona nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Done. But know this. The white man's law rides back soon. Survive it." He turned to his warriors, barking orders, and they retreated to the ridge, leaving Margaret and Iman in the dust. The ranch, her home, was no longer hers. and Caleb Dunn's threat loomed like a vulture circling. She stood, hollowed out, as the sun burned higher, knowing the fight wasn't over. The sun scorched the Arizona dust, branding Margaret Hale's hollowed-out resolve as she watched Chief Keona's warriors vanish over the ridge. Her ranch, John's legacy, was no longer hers. Sacrificed to save 2 Apache warriors and tether her to a neutral trading post. Caleb Dunn's threat hung like smoke, promising a return with Red Creek's law. She turned to Eamon, his massive frame a silent anchor, and knew the desert hadn't finished testing her. By midday in 1876, the air shimmered with heat as Margaret stood in her yard, the woodshed's shadow a reminder of Tarek's fragile life within. Eamon emerged, supporting his brother, whose fever had broken, but left him pale, his 7-foot frame leaning heavily. "Keona returns at dusk," Eamon said, voice low, eyes scanning the horizon. "He'll bring terms for the post." Margaret nodded, her throat tight. Terms meant nothing if Caleb rode back with the sheriff's posse, their ropes itching for Apache necks, and hers for treason. Hoofbeats broke her thoughts, not from Red Creek, but the north. Keona appeared, flanked by 3 elders, their faces etched with ceremonial paint, carrying no weapons but the weight of law. He dismounted, his gaze steady as granite. "Margaret Hale," he said, "you've honored the blood debt. Now, we build." He unrolled a deer-hide map, marking her ranch as Red Creek Trading Post, a neutral zone under Apache and federal treaty. "No blood spills here," he declared. "You manage it. Apache trade with white men, but only through you." Her stomach nodded. Manage a post? She was a rancher, not a diplomat, and Red Creek's townsfolk already spat her name. "And if they refuse?" she asked, voice sharp. Keona's eyes glinted. "They won't. The treaty binds them. Your debt binds us." He handed her a bone-carved token, its weight cold in her palm, a symbol of Apache protection, and a chain to this new life. As Keona's elders marked boundaries with stakes, Caleb Dunn returned, not alone. Sheriff Holt and 4 deputies rode with him, their badges glinting like vultures' eyes. "Margaret," Holt barked, reining his horse, "you're harboring hostiles. Step aside." His gaze flicked to Eamon and Tarek, now outside, their towering forms drawing gasps. Caleb smirked, hand on his pistol. "Told you, Sheriff. She's one of them." Margaret stepped forward, the bone token heavy in her pocket. "They're under treaty," she said, voice like iron. "This land's a trading post now, federal law. Check your papers." Holt's face darkened, but Keona interjected, his English flawless. "She speaks truth. Harm her, and you break Washington's word." He gestured to the elders, who stood unmoved, their presence a silent threat. The deputies shifted, uneasy. Apache law was one thing, but federal treaties carried weight even in Red Creek. Holt spat into the dust. "This ain't over, widow. We'll watch you." He jerked his reins, leading his men off, Caleb's glare promising retribution. Margaret's knees weakened, but she stood tall, the desert's heat her only witness. Keona turned to her. "You've earned respect," he said, "but respect is a blade. Wield it well." He mounted and rode north, leaving her with Eamon, Tarek, and a future carved in sand. Weeks turned to months. Tarek healed, his strength rebuilding the ranch into a fortified post. Eamon stayed, not out of debt, but choice, his hammer and axe shaping corrals where Apache and settlers would meet. Margaret learned their ways, barter, signals, the rhythm of trust. Red Creek's merchants came, grudgingly at first, driven by profit. Apache families arrived, their goods, hides, beads, herbs, stacked beside settlers' grain and tools. No guns entered, by Keona's decree, and Margaret enforced it, her voice steady, her knife close. By 1880, Red Creek Trading Post was a beacon, its name whispered across the territory. Margaret, once a scorned widow, stood as its heart, her graying hair a badge of survival. Tarak's mind for trade drew crowds. Imon's presence quelled fights. Townsfolk no longer spat her name, though some never forgave. One evening, as she watched Apache children trade marbles with settlers' sons under the post's lanterns, Imon joined her. "You changed this land," he said, his voice soft, no longer edged with distrust. Margaret looked at the stars, John's memory a quiet ache. "I just stood my ground," she replied. The desert, once her enemy, had forged her into something new, not a hero, but a bridge. Red Creek Trading Post thrived, a testament to a widow's defiance, two warriors' honor, and a debt that bound them tighter than blood. What did you feel when Margaret Hale stood between guns and honor, forging peace from loss? Her choice reshaped a desert. Would you have dared the same? Drop your thoughts below. Share where you're listening from, and let's keep the fire of these stories burning. Your voice matters to this tale's echo. I'm grateful for every moment you spent in this Arizona dust with us. Until the next sunrise, when another frontier legend calls, ride back for more.